Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Matt Taglia, Senior Director of Emerson College Polling. Matt, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, Emerson College Polling, Pix 11 and The Hill has a new poll of the 2025 New Jersey gubernatorial race. And in both the Democrat and Republican primary, it shows that the most popular candidate is actually the undecided. So talk to us, walk us through the poll. What did you find?
That's right. And of course, it is still a little bit early. It's only January, but on both sides, we see that this is mostly an open race. Talk a little bit more about, who might have a bit of an edge here. On the Democratic side, though, especially, it's 56% undecided. So a majority there are undecided. We see Sherrill has 10%, 8% for Spiller and Baraka, rather, and then 7% for Gottheimer and Sweeney. So again, an open contest. We go down to the Republican primary, and it's a little bit different story. We see that Citarelli is a bit of an early front runner here, 26%. Spadea coming in second with 13%. 47%, though, still undecided. The remaining candidates receiving between 2 and 3%. So again, both sides of this race are totally open at the moment.
Totally open, but if you break it down by demographic, is there anything that sticks out to you?
Yeah, definitely. So on the Democratic side, we see that Sherrill does best with older voters, about 19% among those who are over 70 years of age. So that's something that I would want to see if I'm her. That demographic is reliable. They probably will turn out in reasonably high numbers for a primary in an off-cycle election year. So I think that that's a good sign for her. Baraka gets support from voters who are under 40, about 13%. That's not huge, but that is where that support is coming from. It's not necessarily what I would want to see, but there is room for growth there. Certainly, again, 56% undecided. This could go any which way. I think we just need to get a little bit further down the line to see what's going to happen there. Now, on the Republican side, again, a little bit different story. We do have a huge undecided factor here, but Citarelli, it's a little bit similar to the Democratic side, does best with those who are older, 40% among 60 to 69-year-olds, 32% among those who are 70 plus. On the Republican side, that is very good. That's what I'd want to see if I'm Citarelli. Those are certainly the highest propensity voters. So I think that's a good sign for him. Spadea does better with sort of middle-aged voters. Again, a lot of room for growth there, but I do think that if there's any front runner in either of these races, it's Citarelli right now.
This is almost reminding me, if we go back to 2015, perhaps even the beginning of 2016, when we saw a really crowded Republican primary for president. Donald Trump, a lot of the time, was polling last, and we all know how that story ended with him in his second term right now. And I know you're saying that this is an open contest. Some candidates have the edge right now. Is it too early, A, to tell anything, and B, who are these undecideds and how can they win them over?
Yeah, I don't think that it's necessarily too early. This is a bit of a name ID contest, I think. And if you walk into the race with higher name ID, then you're going to be in an advantage. And that might not be picked up in all of this polling. But, you mentioned Donald Trump when he first entered the presidential contest in 2016, 2015, really. He walked in with tremendous name ID, probably more so than most of the other Republican candidates at the time. So for someone like Citarelli, who has been around, that's going to really help him. On the Democratic side, we can see, I think that we are picking up on the fact that there isn't so much name ID there. It's a bit of a blank canvas, so they can make what they want of it. And spending is going to really matter there. As far as undecided voters go, it's, again, a little bit too early to tell who exactly is going to be undecided once we get closer to the election. We do find that overall, it's the folks who are younger, who are more undecided. Those middle-aged voters are going to be especially important. As we mentioned before, these primaries, they're in an off-cycle election year. we're probably not going to see a lot of participation from the youngest voting demographics. So I think that the candidates are going to want to focus on some of those folks who are 40 and older broadly.
You and I spoke really ad nauseum in the 2024 election cycle going up to November. Does this track with any gubernatorial races you remember from the last cycle, maybe from a few cycles ago? Is it normal for this many people to be undecided less than 6 months out?
Yeah, from the last cycle, I think the easiest comparison is to some of the Senate races that we saw, some of those statewide Senate races. We saw really high undecided numbers, quite close to the November election date when we were pitting the general election candidates against one another. In the primaries, we saw maybe a little bit more decisiveness, because there were several incumbents running. Some of these races were fairly high profile. This is maybe a little bit less of a high profile race in terms of, were it to be held during a general election year, then it might not get quite as many eyes on it. But since we are in an off year right after a presidential election, I think that we do have a lot of attention here. There will be some folks who will be paying attention. The lines are going to be clear. They're not going to have to compete with national candidates who will be running ads or stories about national candidates necessarily. So there will be a lot of attention paid. I think that it is normal to have undecided numbers this high when we've got several months until the primary election, and certainly as far as the general election, which we didn't test here, but I would expect that the undecided number would be very high in the general election as well.
And when you're thinking about New Jersey and the recent governors, Phil Murphy, obviously a Democrat, I'm thinking of Governor Chris Christie, who was a Republican. If you're let's say you emerge as the candidate, the Democratic nominee, the Republican one, who has the edge there, or is it up for grabs?
In any other year, I would say that the Democratic candidate is going to have the edge. However, we saw what happened in the 2024 election. New Jersey was closer than a lot of folks thought it would be. The margin between Harris and Trump was one of the closest we've seen, I think in the past 20 years in New Jersey at the presidential level. So there is certainly an opening here for a Republican candidate to potentially make some gains in an otherwise blue state. You mentioned Christie. He was a Republican who managed to win statewide in New Jersey. It's not unheard of, but certainly, the odds makers would say that, this is a blue state. You're more likely to have a Democrat win this seat at the statewide level if they're running on a semi-moderate platform. A moderate Republican who can maybe acknowledge some of the things that appealed to voters about Donald Trump, but then at the same time push back on some of the less popular ideas in the state of New Jersey, that could be a winning combo for sure.
I think this poll really illustrates your point that a Republican has a shot here based on the approval ratings, because Donald Trump actually has a higher approval rating than Governor Phil Murphy. Walk us through that.
Yeah, that's right. So we see that Trump has a 48% favorable rating versus 46% unfavorable. You look at Murphy and it's 44% favorable, 42% unfavorable. So really the margin there is about the same. But it is interesting to see that Trump has probably one of the highest favorability ratings that we've seen ever. That's certainly true at the national level. It seems to be true in the state of New Jersey currently. A majority of independents have a favorable view of Donald Trump, and a majority of independents have an unfavorable view of Phil Murphy. So, it is interesting times, certainly. I think that Trump has some of the highest political capital he's ever had. That seems to be true in New Jersey. I think that's definitely true nationwide. But otherwise, these favorability numbers, they break down mostly in partisan terms, but I think it's worth highlighting that those independent voters out there who aren't committed to one party or the other in New Jersey, they overall have a favorable opinion of Trump.
That's really interesting that he is experienced for himself historic highest favorability ratings. When you're looking at that by demo, is it every demographic is now has a more favorable view of Donald Trump than they did in the past? Is there any demo that's spiking, that's surprising you? What does that look like?
I think that the surprising features are where Trump has managed to pick up some favorability among what we probably at once would have considered that Democratic base of sort of younger voters and minority voters. We talked a lot about them in the run-up to the 2024 election. This is where Trump was able to make up some ground. Yes, he continued to do well with white voters, with middle-aged to older voters. It was only that oldest demographic that didn't quite turn out for him at the levels that many may have predicted. But those younger voters, those minorities, Trump is making up ground there. We see that in the favorability numbers. We see that in the exit poll data as well. That's true nationally. And we see that reflected in the New Jersey numbers as well.
You and I talked all of 2024 about how the economy was the top issue facing voters. So in New Jersey, 2 weeks into Trump's presidency, his second term rather, how do people feel their household income compares to the cost of living?
Yeah, a majority, or 63%, say that their income is falling behind the cost of living in New Jersey. That's a that includes majorities among all of the age groups. Voters over 50 are actually more likely to say that their income is decreasing relative to the cost of living. I think that that's most likely because when you're younger, you tend to see more career progression than when you're older or possibly retired. But interesting nonetheless, and at the same time, everyone across all ages, again, say that their income is lower relative to the cost of living. Women are also more likely to say that they're falling behind, 67% versus 58% for men, their income. So yeah, I think there's a pretty clear picture here that folks feel the pinch. They think that inflation is rising faster than they're able to make money.
And you also polled if voters in New Jersey feel that the Garden State's going in the right direction. What do people think, and what does this mean for the governor's race? Is this a good news for a Republican, rather, if more voters think the state's going the wrong way, that they want to change the tide there?
Yeah, and this was 50-50. So 50% said that the state is headed in the right direction versus 50% who say it's on the wrong track. So I don't know that that's necessarily going to help one candidate, one party, or the other. If we look at the partisan breakdown, it is sort of what you would expect. 70% of Democrats say that the state is headed in the right direction. Republicans and independents, though, they say that it is on the wrong track. 64% for Republicans, 68% for independents. So I think that last number, that 68% of independents who say it's on the wrong track, that is one I'd flag. I think that if you are the Republican candidate in the general election this year, you want to see that number high among that group. That's going to create a favorable atmosphere for you. If you can point to the Democratic governance in the state and say, look, they're responsible for the state of affairs right now, that can really help in winning over some of those independent voters who clearly feel like the state is not headed in the right direction.
And I would love to wrap up the conversation by talking about some local issues facing New Jerseyans. First, the congestion pricing. I work in New Jersey. I live also near the congestion pricing zone. And this is a large topic of conversation, and people feel either adamantly one way or the other about it. But according to your poll, how do people feel about the toll that now New York is charging drivers to enter Manhattan?
So the toll is not popular in the state of New Jersey. I think some might have expected that, but now we have numbers to back that up. 57% oppose congestion pricing overall, just 21% support it. So this is a pretty deeply unpopular policy with folks in New Jersey. No party outright supports congestion pricing. Democrats show the most support, but it's just 27% overall. Independents show the least support, actually, 13%. So there is a bit of a consensus here. There are a lot of folks who aren't necessarily certain. It might not affect them. They might live towards the southern end of the state and don't feel strongly one way or the other about the congestion pricing. But overall, voters in the state of New Jersey are not a fan of the new congestion pricing.
There's also some school-centric plans that you guys pulled. A, the proposal to provide free full-day kindergarten, and B, the ban on cell phones in public schools for kindergartners through seniors. What do people think about these?
These are both pretty popular policies. So 64% support the ban on cell phones in K-12 schools. Just 20% are in opposition. We see that voters who are under the age of 30 are the least supportive of the policy, but it's still a plurality, 48%. You see the most support among those who are over the age of 70 at 81%. And this is, again, a place where all of the parties agree. Democrats overwhelmingly in favor, 86%, but Republicans also in favor with 67%. So this is clearly a popular policy. If we look down to the free kindergarten, this is even more popular. 74% support free kindergarten in public schools, just 10% in opposition. Again, this is pretty similar, broad agreement between the parties. 86% of Democrats favor this policy, 67% of Republicans. Support does decrease with age, but it's still a majority among all of the age demographics. So both these policies, very popular. I think voters in the state are just overwhelmingly in favor of these.
Matt, per usual, I appreciate our conversations. I'm so glad Emerson College had a new poll out. I'm looking forward to many more. Thanks again for coming back on.
So am I. Thanks so much, Brittany.